On a deserted highway in the middle of the night, a black sanitation worker was going about his usual routine when a horrific car accident unfolded before his eyes. Without hesitation, he ran toward the danger, pulling an unconscious woman from the wreckage and rushing her to the hospital. When he learned she was in critical condition, he didn't think twice before donating his own blood to save her life. His bravery cost him his job, but he had no regrets, because he knew it was the right thing to do, a selfless act, a choice that would change his life forever. The highway stretched endlessly under the dim glow of flickering streetlights, the silence of the night broken only by the occasional rush of a passing car. It was just past 2 a.m., and Memphis was quiet, the streets nearly deserted. The warm, sticky air of the southern summer clung to everything, making the night feel heavier than it should. Darius Walker, dressed in his reflective safety vest over a faded jumpsuit, sat behind the wheel of his city-issued street cleaning truck, his shift barely underway. The familiar hum of the engine vibrated through the cabin as he slowly maneuvered the heavy vehicle along the side of the road, the mechanical brushes sweeping debris off the asphalt. He had done this route dozens of times, clearing the roads while the rest of the city slept. His grip on the wheel was steady, his eyes flicking between the road ahead and the controls on the dashboard. The job wasn't complicated, just keep moving, clear the streets, don't fall behind schedule. It was routine, predictable, and in a life that had been anything but, Darius had learned to appreciate that. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, enough to cover rent and take care of his mother, whose health had been declining over the past few years. Every extra shift, every overnight job was just another way to make sure she had what she needed. The city, of course, never noticed workers like him. No one thought about who kept the streets clean, who fixed the potholes, who made sure the roads were clear before the morning rush. But that didn't bother Darius. He wasn't in this for recognition, he just needed the paycheck. Up ahead, the highway stretched dark and empty, disappearing into the horizon. The only movement came from the occasional 18-wheeler rumbling past or a lone sedan heading home from a late shift. It was a slow night, like most nights. But slow nights had a way of changing in an instant. A car sped past him, headlights blurring as it flew down the highway at a reckless speed. Darius barely had time to register the movement before crash, the sound of metal twisting, glass shattering, tires screeching. The car veered sharply, slamming into the guardrail with terrifying force, the impact sending up a spray of sparks before the vehicle spun out and came to a violent stop. Darius instinctively hit the brakes, his truck groaning as it came to a halt. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. He had seen bad wrecks before, but this one was different. Without thinking, he threw the truck into park and jumped out, his boots hitting the pavement hard as he sprinted toward the crash. Smoke curled from the crumpled hood, the air thick with the sharp, burning scent of rubber and gasoline. The front of the car was completely crushed against the barrier, the windshield shattered, fragments of glass scattered across the asphalt. As he reached the driver's side, his stomach clenched. Inside, slumped against the deployed airbags, was a young woman. Blood trailed down the side of her face, staining her pale skin. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. She was alive, but not for long, if he didn't do something. Smoke curled from the wreckage, thick and acrid, mixing with the metallic scent of blood and the burnt rubber stench of overheated tires. The eerie flicker of a broken headlight cast jagged shadows across the pavement as Darius rushed to the driver's side. The car's hood was crumpled beyond recognition, steam hissing from beneath the wreckage. Glass littered the asphalt like scattered diamonds, reflecting the dull orange glow of the highway lamps above. The only sound beyond the fading groan of the engine was the ragged, uneven breathing coming from inside. Darius's pulse pounded in his ears as he leaned through the shattered window. The woman behind the wheel, young, blonde, dressed in what looked like a business suit, was slumped forward, her head resting against the deflated airbag. Blood streaked down her forehead, trailing along her cheek, pooling at the collar of her shirt. Her eyes were closed, her face pale beneath the bruises already forming along her temple. One arm hung limply by her side, her fingers barely twitching. She was alive, but just barely. "Hey, can you hear me?" Darius's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. He reached in carefully, fingers pressing against the pulse point at her neck, faint, weak, but still there. He let out a sharp breath. There wasn't much time. He glanced at the mangled door, tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. Jammed from the impact, the metal had crumpled inward, trapping her inside. He yanked harder, but it wouldn't give. Damn it. His mind raced. He couldn't just stand here waiting for an ambulance. Who knew how long that would take at this hour? He needed to get her out. Now. Scanning the ground, his eyes landed on a jagged piece of concrete near the wreck. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, fingers tightening around its rough edges as he reared back and slammed it against the window. The remaining shards of glass splintered, falling inwards. Reaching through carefully, he avoided the sharp edges as he unlocked the door from the inside and yanked at the handle again. This time, with a groan of metal against metal, it finally gave way. The moment the door swung open, he moved fast. He crouched down, slipping one arm behind her shoulders, the other under her legs, carefully lifting her from the wreckage. She was lighter than he expected, but dead weight, her body completely limp against him. Up close, he could hear her shallow breaths, could feel the warmth of her blood soaking into his sleeve. She needed help. Now. He didn't have time to think. He didn't have time to hesitate. Without a second thought, Darius turned and ran toward his truck. Darius moved fast, his boots pounding against the pavement as he carried the unconscious woman toward his Chevy Silverado parked a few yards away. Her weight pressed against his arms, her head lolled against his shoulder, blood soaking into the fabric of his sleeve. He could feel the faint rise and fall of her chest against him, but her breathing was too shallow, too slow. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out everything but the urgency screaming through his veins. Reaching the truck, he yanked the door open with one hand and carefully maneuvered her inside, laying her across the passenger seat as gently as he could. Her body slumped slightly, her face pale under the glow of the overhead light. He pulled his flannel jacket from the back seat and pressed it against the wound on her forehead, trying to slow the bleeding. The sight of her like this, broken, vulnerable, sent a strange, unshakable weight pressing down on his chest. He didn't know her, had no idea who she was or why she had been on the road alone at this hour, but none of that mattered right now. Slamming the door shut, he rushed around to the driver's side, practically throwing himself behind the wheel. His hands trembled slightly as he jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Without hesitating, he threw the truck into drive and hit the gas. The tires squealed against the asphalt as he peeled away from the wreck, the night swallowing them whole. His eyes flicked between the road ahead and the woman beside him. Her head tilted slightly to the side, her lips slightly parted as if she were trying to say something but couldn't. The blood from her wound had slowed, but she was still, too silent. "Come on, stay with me," he muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The highway stretched out before him, empty and endless. The speedometer crept higher as he pushed the truck faster, the old engine groaning in protest. But he didn't care. His mind raced, calculating the distance to the nearest hospital. St. Jude's, the closest trauma center, was at least 15 minutes away at this speed. That was too damn long. His pulse pounded harder. He reached for his phone, fumbling with one hand as he pulled up 911 and hit dial. The line rang once. Then a calm, professional voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? This is Darius Walker. I'm heading north on I-55 towards St. Jude's. I've got an unconscious woman, car accident, major blood loss. She needs help now, he said, his voice clipped, urgent. Are you the driver involved in the accident? No, I found her. She was alone, no other cars stopped. She's barely breathing. Sir, I need you to stay on the line. Can you confirm her condition? Is she responsive? Darius glanced at her again. Her face was still slack, her body unmoving except for the weak rise and fall of her chest. She's out cold. Pulse is weak. I don't know how much blood she's lost, but it's bad. Understood. I'm dispatching paramedics to meet you at St. Jude's. Estimated arrival 10 minutes, maybe less, he said, his foot pressing harder on the gas. Drive safely, sir. Keep talking to her. Try to keep her conscious if she wakes up. The line went dead. Darius cursed under his breath, tossing the phone onto the dashboard. He took a sharp turn onto the exit ramp, tires screeching slightly as he merged onto the main road leading into the city. The hospital was close now, just a few blocks away. He could already see the glowing red emergency sign in the distance, the entrance illuminated by bright overhead floodlights. Almost there. His fingers drummed against the wheel as he pulled up to the ER bay, the truck jerking to a stop just outside the automatic doors. Before he had even shifted into park, he was already unbuckling his seatbelt and yanking the door open. Jumping out, he ran to the passenger's side, flung the door open, and carefully lifted the woman into his arms again. The moment he turned, 2 paramedics were already rushing toward him, a gurney between them. "What happened?" one of them, a younger man with sharp eyes, asked as they reached him. "Car accident. She was alone, unconscious when I found her. She's lost a lot of blood," Darius said, his voice rough, breathless. The paramedics quickly transferred her onto the stretcher, immediately checking her vitals. The older paramedic, a woman with graying hair tied back in a ponytail, frowned as she examined the gash on the woman's forehead. "She needs a transfusion, fast," she muttered to her partner before glancing at Darius. "You her family?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "Just the guy who got her here." The paramedics exchanged a glance before nodding. "You did good," the younger one said, pushing the stretcher toward the emergency door. Darius took a step back, watching as they wheeled her inside, disappearing through the bright white corridors of the hospital. And then, for the first time since the accident, the adrenaline started to fade. His chest still rose and fell in deep, steady breaths, but his muscles felt heavier now. His hands, still stained with her blood, trembled slightly at his sides. The weight of the night, of what had just happened, settled on his shoulders all at once. He had done everything he could. Now it was up to them. Exhaling sharply, Darius turned toward his truck, rubbing a hand down his face. He should leave. His shift was already shot, and there'd be hell to pay when he got back to work, but his feet wouldn't move. His gaze drifted back toward the hospital doors. He hadn't planned to stay, but for some reason he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Darius sat in the waiting room, elbows on his knees, foot tapping against the tile floor. The adrenaline that had carried him this far was finally wearing off, leaving behind an exhaustion so deep it settled into his bones. He stared at his hands. Rebecca's blood had dried in dark, uneven streaks across his skin, staining the creases of his fingers. He needed to wash it off, needed to do something, but all he could do was sit and wait. The hospital moved around him, doctors in scrubs rushing past, nurses calling out instructions, patients being wheeled in on stretchers. He was just another body in the waiting area now, invisible again like he had been his entire life. The only difference was he couldn't bring himself to leave. Then the doors to the trauma wing swung open, and a doctor in blue scrubs stepped out. His ID badge read Dr. Harper Mitchell, and his face was the kind of tired that came from fighting to keep people alive for hours on end. His sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on Darius. "You brought in the accident victim?" Darius was on his feet before the words had fully registered. "Yeah, is she—" "She's stable," Dr. Mitchell said, his voice steady, clinical. "Massive blood loss, concussion, some internal bruising, but no spinal damage or organ failure. She's lucky you got her here when you did." His gaze flicked downward, lingering on the blood drying on Darius's hands. "We started a transfusion, but—" he hesitated, something unreadable in his expression. "She's AB negative, it's rare, and our supply is dangerously low right now." Darius blinked. "You don't have enough?" "We're getting an emergency request from the nearest blood bank, but that takes time," Dr. Mitchell said. "And time isn't something she has a lot of right now." Darius didn't think. He didn't hesitate. "Test me." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Yeah," Darius said, already rolling up his sleeve. "If I'm a match, take what you need." The doctor gave him a long, considering look, then nodded. "Come with me." Darius followed him down the hallway, past the trauma rooms and into a smaller medical bay where a nurse was already preparing a blood draw kit. She barely looked up as she tied a tourniquet around his bicep, swabbed the inside of his arm with alcohol, and slid the needle into his vein. the sting barely registered. His focus was elsewhere, on the knowledge that somewhere beyond these walls, Rebecca was lying unconscious, waiting for something that might not come in time. The nurse filled a small vial, labeled it, and handed it off to another staff member, who disappeared down the hall. Darius sat still, staring at the dark red liquid inside the tube before it vanished from sight. "You ever donated before?" the nurse asked, breaking the silence. Darius exhaled through his nose. "A long time ago." The nurse hummed, making a note on her clipboard. "Results will be back in a few minutes. If you're a match, we'll start the transfusion immediately." Darius nodded, his jaw tight. He didn't care about the waiting. He didn't care about the needle or the slight dizziness creeping in from sitting still too long. He cared about making sure she made it through the night. Minutes stretched on, the ticking clock on the wall too loud. Then, finally, a different nurse walked in, holding a clipboard, her expression unreadable. "You're a match." Darius let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Let's get started," the nurse said, already preparing the equipment. "You'll feel a little lightheaded after, but we'll keep you here for monitoring." "I'm good," Darius said, rolling his sleeve up higher. "Just do it." The nurse nodded, and within seconds the process began. Blood flowed from his arm, filling the collection bag, the slow drain making his head feel heavier, his limbs slightly sluggish. He didn't care. He kept his gaze fixed on the ceiling, letting the rhythmic beep of machines fill the silence. Time blurred. The bag filled. The nurse removed the needle, pressed gauze to his arm, taped it down. She handed him a juice box and a granola bar, like that was enough to replenish what he had just given away. "You should rest for a few minutes," she said, but Darius was already moving, pushing himself upright despite the sudden wave of dizziness that made his vision swim for a moment. "Where is she?" he asked. "She's still unconscious," the nurse said gently, "but the transfusion will help." Darius ran a hand over his face, still trying to shake off the lingering lightheadedness. He had done what he could, given what he could. Now all he could do was wait. Darius sat in the hospital chair, staring at the gauze taped over the inside of his elbow where the needle had been just minutes ago. His body felt heavier, his limbs sluggish from the pint of blood he had just given away, but none of that mattered. Across the hall, Rebecca Langley was still unconscious but stable. The transfusion had worked. The worst was over. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. That was it then. He had done his part. Pushing himself to his feet, he grabbed his flannel jacket from the back of the chair, slinging it over his shoulder as he walked toward the exit. The waiting room had begun to fill with early morning patients, nurses swapping shifts, the sterile hum of the hospital a sharp contrast to the stillness of the night before. He should have felt relieved, knowing she would wake up, but instead, there was only a dull, lingering exhaustion pressing into his bones. He didn't stop at the front desk, didn't look back as he stepped out into the cool morning air. His truck was still parked outside, exactly where he had left it. He climbed in, slammed the door shut, and sat there for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. The events of the night blurred together in his mind. The wreck, the blood, the desperate drive to the hospital, the moment he realized she might not make it. But she had. And now it was time to deal with his own problems. By the time Darius arrived at the sanitation depot, the morning shift had already started. Workers were scattered around the lot, preparing for their routes, grabbing their assignments from the dispatch office. The second he stepped inside, Frank Delaney, his supervisor, was waiting for him. Frank was built like a linebacker, arms crossed over his chest, his expression already set in stone. "Walker," he said, his voice sharp. "My office, now." Darius sighed but didn't argue. He knew this was coming. Inside the cramped office, Frank shut the door, tossing a clipboard onto the desk before fixing Darius with a hard stare. "Mind telling me why the hell you left your route last night?" Darius ran a hand over his face, his exhaustion catching up to him all at once. "There was an accident," he said simply. "A bad one. No one else stopped. I had to do something." Frank scoffed, shaking his head. "That ain't your job." "She was dying, Frank." Darius's voice was firm but controlled. "I got her to the hospital in time. She's alive because of it." Frank's jaw tightened. For a moment, Darius almost thought he might understand, but then the man sighed, shaking his head. "That's real noble of you, Walker. But you left your post, didn't clock out. Dispatch had no idea where the hell you were, you just disappeared. You know how that looks?" Darius clenched his jaw. Yeah, he knew exactly how it looked. Frank sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't got a choice here. The higher-ups don't care about your hero act. You walked off the job and there's no coming back from that." The words hit harder than Darius expected, even though he had seen them coming from miles away. "You're letting me go," he said, more statement than question. Frank didn't look at him when he answered. "Turn in your uniform, you'll get your final check next week." Darius didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. He left the office, walked to his locker, and pulled out the work jacket he had worn for the past 6 years. The name patch stitched over the pocket, Walker, felt heavier than it should as he folded it, setting it on the bench. Around him, other workers kept their heads down, pretending not to see. No one wanted to be the next guy in his position. By the time he stepped out of the depot, the sun had fully risen. Across the city, in a private hospital suite, Rebecca Langley opened her eyes. At first, everything was a blur. The bright fluorescent lights above, the soft beeping of the heart monitor beside her, the sterile scent of antiseptic. Her body felt heavy, like she had been dragged out of deep water, her limbs refusing to move the way she wanted them to. A voice pulled her from the haze. It was Langley. She blinked slowly, turning her head to see Sophia Turner, her assistant, standing at the foot of her bed, phone in hand, her sharp eyes scanning Rebecca like she was taking stock of every bruise, every bandage. Rebecca swallowed, her throat dry. "What happened?" "You were in an accident," Sophia answered smoothly. "A serious one." Rebecca's mind fought to piece together the memories, flashes of headlights, the sharp jolt of impact, then nothing. She exhaled, trying to push herself upright, but the dull ache in her ribs made her grimace. "Take it slow," Sophia advised. "The doctors said you suffered a concussion and significant blood loss." Blood lost. That part she hadn't expected. Her gaze flicked down to the IV in her arm, the bandage wrapped around her wrist where the needle had been placed. "How bad was it?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Sophia hesitated just long enough for Rebecca to catch it. "If you hadn't gotten to the hospital when you did," she admitted, "you probably wouldn't have made it." Rebecca's fingers curled into the blanket. The reality of the words settled over her like a weight she wasn't ready to carry. For the first time since waking up, she felt something close to fear. She forced herself to take a slow breath. "Who brought me in?" Sophia barely glanced at her phone before answering. "A man named Darius Walker." Rebecca frowned. The name meant nothing to her. "Who is he?" Sophia swiped across her screen, scanning the notes she had already gathered. Sanitation worker, 36 years old, no criminal record, no outstanding debts, lives alone except for his mother, who he's been taking care of for the past few years. He was working the night shift when he found you. She paused. "He also donated blood to save your life." Rebecca stilled. She had expected a good Samaritan, maybe some passerby who had called 911 and kept moving. But this was different. She glanced at Sophia. "Where is he now?" Sophia's jaw tightened slightly. "After spending the night in the hospital, making sure you were okay, he went back to work and got fired." Rebecca's grip on the blanket tightened. She exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. Her mind was still sluggish, still trying to catch up with everything, but this part was clear. "Find him," she said finally, her voice steady. "Now." After coming home, Darius sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the pile of overdue bills stacked in front of him. The thin morning light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the cluttered space. A lukewarm cup of coffee sat untouched beside him, its surface rippling slightly when he exhaled a slow, tired breath. He should have been at work right now, out on his usual route, doing the job he had done for the past 6 years. But instead he was here, unemployed, fired for doing the right thing. His mother was still asleep in the next room, her soft breathing the only sound in the quiet apartment. He had spent years making sure she was taken care of, working extra shifts, doing whatever it took to keep the bills paid. But now? Now he had nothing. He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion pressing down on him like a weight. The events of the past 24 hours played in his mind like a broken reel. The accident, the wreckage, Rebecca's blood on his hands, the desperate drive to the hospital, the transfusion. He had risked everything to save her, and now he was paying the price. A sharp knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Frowning, he pushed himself up, his body still sluggish from the blood loss, and made his way across the apartment. When he opened the door, the last thing he expected was a sharply dressed woman standing on his doorstep. Sophia Turner. She stood with the kind of posture that made it clear she wasn't here for small talk. Dressed in a crisp black blazer, her expression was unreadable, her eyes scanning him quickly, taking in the exhaustion, the slump in his shoulders, the worn-out flannel he hadn't bothered to change since last night. "Darius Walker?" she asked. He squeezed the door a little tighter. "Yes. Who are you?" Sophia nodded. "I'm the assistant to Rebecca Langley, the girl you saved yesterday. She wants to see you." Darius blinked. "She's awake?" "She is," Sophia confirmed. Darius hesitated. He had walked away from the hospital thinking that was the end of it. He didn't expect gratitude, didn't need it. He had done what anyone should have done. That was enough. But something about the way Sophia was looking at him, like she already knew what he was thinking, made him sigh. "Give me a minute," he muttered, stepping back inside to grab his jacket. The hospital felt different now. The chaos of the night before had been replaced with a calm efficiency, doctors moving from room to room, nurses taking notes, quiet conversations murmuring through the halls. As Sophia led him through the corridors, Darius could feel eyes on him, staff members giving him brief, curious glances. Word must have spread about the man who brought in the CEO of Langley's services covered in blood, then gave his own to save her life. Darius stepped into the hospital room, the sterile scent of antiseptic lingering in the air. Rebecca was sitting upright in bed, looking stronger than she had any right to after what she'd been through. The bruises on her face had darkened, the bandage on her forehead stark against her pale skin, but there was an undeniable sharpness in her eyes, a presence, a force of will. The second she saw him, she straightened slightly. "Darius Walker," she said, as if testing the name, making sure it fit the man who had saved her life. Darius shifted awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't think you'd remember me." Rebecca let out a small, tired exhale, not quite a laugh, but close. "It's hard to forget the man who pulled me out of a wreck and gave me his own blood." Her gaze softened slightly. "Thank you." Darius shrugged. "You don't have to thank me." Rebecca's brow furrowed. "I do. You didn't have to stop that night. You didn't have to risk yourself, or stay, or—" She gestured toward her IV, her voice lowering slightly. "Give something of yourself to keep me alive." Darius shook his head. "I did what anyone should have done." Rebecca studied him for a long moment. "You think anyone would have done that?" Darius didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew the truth. Rebecca exhaled slowly, as if weighing her words carefully. "I don't believe in letting debts go unpaid," she said. "And I don't believe people like you should be wasted on jobs that don't deserve you." She leaned forward slightly. "I want to do something for you." Darius tensed. He knew where this was going. "I don't need money." Rebecca gave him a small, knowing smile. "I didn't say anything about money." Darius frowned. "Then what?" Rebecca's expression shifted, sharper, more focused. Business mode. "I'm launching a new branch of my company," she said. "A rescue and roadside assistance service. Not just tow trucks, but real emergency response. Helping people who are stranded, injured, or in situations where first responders take too long." She held his gaze. "And I want you to run it." Darius blinked. He had expected a thank you, maybe even some token of gratitude, but this? This was something else entirely. He let out a short breath. "You want me to manage a company, Rebecca? I was a sanitation worker yesterday." Rebecca didn't flinch. "And last night you were the only person who did something when it mattered. That's exactly why I want you." Darius shook his head. I don't know the first thing about running a business." Rebecca's lips quirked slightly. "That's what training is for." Darius exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He didn't belong in an office. Didn't know anything about business strategies, budgets, hiring staff. He had spent his life in jobs no one noticed, doing work that didn't come with titles or recognition, and yet here was a woman who barely knew him, offering him a shot at something bigger. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. He could say no, go home, look for another blue-collar job, keep scraping by like he always had. Or he could take a chance on something different, something more. After a long pause, he finally nodded. "All right." Rebecca's lips curved slightly, satisfaction flickering in her bruised features. "Good," she said, extending a hand. "Let's get to work." Darius gripped her hand firmly. "Yeah," he said, "let's." The first few weeks were brutal. Darius had never stepped foot in an office before, never dealt with contracts, budgeting, logistics, or the endless stream of emails that seemed to never stop flooding in. At first he felt like an outsider, sitting in meetings where people threw around business jargon like a second language. He wasn't a manager. He was a guy who had spent years behind the wheel of a sanitation truck, working in the background while the city moved on without noticing him. But Rebecca had meant what she said. She trained him. She didn't just toss him into the deep end and expect him to swim. She walked him through every step, had him shadow her senior staff, set him up with leadership courses, and made sure he understood the vision behind the new company. The more he learned, the more he realized that this job wasn't about paperwork or board meetings. It was about people. It was about making sure no one was left stranded in the middle of nowhere, about sending the right teams to the right places, about responding fast enough to make a difference. And that was something Darius understood better than anyone. Months passed, and what had once felt impossible became second nature. Darius grew into the role, learning, adapting, leading. He built a team from the ground up. Former paramedics, mechanics, ex-military rescue workers, people who knew what it meant to step up when others wouldn't. He worked alongside them, not just as a manager, but as one of them, going out on calls when things got rough, making sure his people knew he wasn't some suit sitting behind a desk all day. The company launched its first emergency response fleet, expanding beyond simple roadside assistance into something bigger, something real, and at the center of it all, Darius Walker was the man running it. One evening, as he stood in the company's operations center, now a fully functioning hub of dispatchers, rescue teams, and state-of-the-art equipment, he looked out over the bustling floor, the sound of ringing phones and radio chatter filling the space. A year ago, he had been cleaning the city's streets, invisible, overlooked. Now, he was here, running something that mattered, making a difference. Behind him, Rebecca stepped up beside him, arms crossed, a knowing smile on her face. "You've built something incredible," she said. Darius let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Didn't do it alone." Rebecca smirked. "No, but it wouldn't have happened without you." He glanced back at the team working the floor, at the rescue trucks rolling out of the garage, at the people who relied on him now. His life had changed forever. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.